Hi, my name is Angel Wilson, and I will be doing my oral presentation on an interviewee from the Grand Valley State University Veterans Project. I chose Pia White. Pia White was in Japan at the time of World War II. A little background on Pia. First, she was born in Rome in 1926. Her father is a Japanese diplomat, and her mother was an American studying at Cambridge at the time. She does have one older brother and sister. At around 5 to 6 months old, her family moved from Rome to Greece, and then to Germany, and then back to Japan, where she was able to start learning Japanese on top of the other two languages that she did know, which was Italian and Spanish. After staying in Japan for a few years, her and her family moved to Belgium, where she was able to learn French. They stayed there for about 3 years and then moved back to Japan. Around this time was the start of World War II. She was about 13 years old. She does remember being able to stay informed on what was happening, the rise of fascism across Europe, and the mistreatment of the Jewish people happening in Germany and across the European countries as well. She was able to continue to go to school. She opted to go to a school in Tokyo, and had to stay with an aunt rather than going to a very strict Catholic school. At the school in Tokyo, she was able to earn a college level education in high school. Around this time as well, many of the families were moving from the cities into kind of more of a village area to avoid bombings. Pia White and her family owned a summer house in a mountain village near Tokyo. So most of the family did move there, all except her dad, actually, who decided to stay in their house in Tokyo for a while. She did note that men were starting to be drafted around this time to fight in the war, and that foreigners were starting to be mistreated. Luckily, she does deny any discrimination, even though she is half American. The food problems in Japan started to become worse. She does note that there was a lot of food scarcity even before the start of World War II. Since Japan was in a war with China, they had drafted many of the men who were farmers and able to grow and travel the food to different cities. Therefore, there was no one doing those things anymore, and food was starting to become scarce. And at the beginning of World War II, it only made this worse. She did rely on bartering and begging, and even noted that if she was able to do a comedy sketch, she was able to get more food to bring home. Later in her life, her mother learned of a position for her to work at a police station. She was able to apply and get a job there, transcribing and translating, which was wonderful since she knew a lot of languages for the Japanese police station. Eventually, her father did move from their home in Tokyo to their home at the mountain village, and luckily he did, because shortly after, the city was bombed, and that house was completely destroyed. Unfortunately for Pia, her brother was drafted and served in the army and eventually was killed in 1945 in action right before the end of the war. Pia does state that morale in Japan was definitely down, and she noticed that even the news at the time with Japan trying to boost morale was just propaganda. Many people, upon learning about the Pearl Harbor, disagreed with it, including her parents, stating that it kind of opened up a way for the United States to come into a war with Japan that Japan just couldn't win. A lot of the bombings that were happening in Japan, Pia was hearing about and just hearing horror stories. She does note that one horror story that she thinks was the worst was when a bomb had dropped into kind of old Tokyo. Old Tokyo was an area that was mainly older generation folks, and she does recall hearing that they were jumping into the water to kind of save themselves from this bomb, and eventually were boiled alive. She herself was even very close to a bomb in Tokyo. She remembers going to Tokyo to take her final exams, and then there was a bombing not too far from it. She heard about this later, as she said she fortunately slept through this bomb and came out unharmed. After Pearl Harbor came the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki with the atomic bombs. Upon hearing about this, she just couldn't understand fully what this was and what the damage did. And it wasn't just Pia that couldn't understand it. Most of the Japanese people who had not been in this bombing, and even some people who did, just didn't really fully grasp the concept of what the atomic bomb was, what it did to people. They had no idea the after effects, and their knowledge of the atom and hearing about this being used in some kind of bomb just didn't make any full sense to them at the time. She said that it did take days or even weeks for people to communicate with other parts of the cities and other people just to tell their stories about what happened, as communication was completely destroyed there. And upon hearing it, she definitely was very saddened about what happened to her country. Shortly after this, the emperor did announce their surrender, and Pia does note that that is the first time she's ever heard her emperor speak. Some big takeaways that Pia took away from World War II was the fact about being cold, living in that mountain village house. It could get really cold, especially in the winter or at night, and there were times where she would wake up and her blankets would be stiff and frozen, and they were unable to get warm, and so she's now vowed to never be cold again. Um, After the war, she did meet an American soldier, Lieutenant Ken White. He stayed in Tokyo after his enlistment ended. They ended up dating and getting married, and after that moved to America while she was pregnant with their first child. All in all, Pia's story is incredible. Things that she's noticed and went through, and how close she was to bombings, and um, just the survival in general of all people in Japan. It's not something we normally hear about, so I was very excited to read about it and be able to share it with you. Thank you.